Hi everyone, I'm Chiara Nascimben from the University of Padova. I'm a PhD student, and today I would like to talk about the link between auditory working memory and language development. As many of you know, language development is a complex process that entails the acquisition of domain-specific abilities and different levels of processing. And despite its complexity, infants actually tune into linguistic information since early on, since pregnancy, and they acquire language very rapidly through the first years of life. However, the reason behind this specialized function is still up for debate. And beside the strictly understood language function, researchers in the last decades have tried to understand what other cognitive processes might be interlinked, and have supported the idea that features of memory are strongly linked with human language. For instance, it's widely accepted that there's a strong positive link between long-term memory and language development, specifically lexical acquisition. And we know that features of verbal working memory explain how we capture rapidly changing strings of speech throughout the day, and without this capacity of maintain recent traces of speech sounds, any speech stimulus would fade away as soon as interfering linguistic stimuli were presented, making it impossible to store information in long-term memory. Among the models of auditory working memory, the phonological loop within the multi-component model by Budley and Itch is by far the most studied. And according to this model, adults and older children use articulatory rehearsal to avoid information decay and to keep information in memory. This model assumes, however, a strong reliance on fully developed lexical, phonological, and executive control processes. In fact, the first description of phonological working memory in developmental ages are reported after vocabulary spurts, so between 30 and 48 months of age. While for the covert rehearsal strategy, we have to wait a bit more till children are 7 to 8 years of age. So the question that remains is what happens before that? To what extent language acquisition relies on similar processes in infancy? We know from literature that infants are able to hold speech information in real time, and there is a wealth of evidence for that, from studies on statistical learning to rural learning to rapid word object mapping. Moreover, there's also evidence of a strong auditory motor connection, so that the sounds infants are able to distinguish are modulated by their own and other people-associated mouth movements. So what is still unknown is whether this link between articulatory movements and speech perception reflects primitive processes to maintain speech information in working memory, and whether verbal capacities are central for language acquisition, also when the vocabulary is still to be acquired, so in infancy. And also whether individual differences in phonological working memory are associated with language skills. To answer this question, we tested the phonological working memory skills and language abilities of 64 infants between 5 and 24 months of age. So to assess phonological working memory, we used two alternative looking paradigms consisting of rapid learning blocks that evaluate infants' ability to remember target sequences and to predict upcoming events while distracting stimulus are intertwined. In particular, the study is made up of 3 blocks, you see on the left side. And each of these blocks consists of 6 familiarization trials and 2 test trials. The familiarization trials include 3 presentations of the target sequences and 3 intermixed distracting sequences. In each block, the number of the target trials is small to emphasize the use of working memory and to prevent the contribution of long-term memory. Moreover, the target and distracting sequences changed during the blocks, so infants had to relearn the sequences. So let me give you an example of a couple of trials. So at the beginning of each trial, we have these arrows that function as an attention getter. As soon as the infant looks in the center, the sound is played. In this case, it's a target stimuli. And after the sound, a puppet appears on the left side of the screen, in this case, because it's matched with the target sequence. At the end of the trial, another one starts, so we still have the arrows.
Legumi.
We hear another sequence of syllables, in this case, the distracting stimuli, and we see the puppet appearing on the opposite side of the screen. Test trials follow the same structure as familiarization trials, but the puppet does not appear at the end. And we code infants' first look as correct or incorrect based on the sequence they heard. So we took the infant's first look accuracy as our dependent variable. Here is a summary of the structure of the task: 6 familiarization trials, 2 test trials, repeated for 3 blocks. Do note that in order to succeed in the test, babies need to rapidly learn to discriminate between target and distracting sounds while processing episodes. And in line with adult definition of working memory processing episodes includes items to be remembered combined with problem to be solved. In this case, the problem to be solved is to learn a new word-object mapping in the presence of other sounds, and as in real life. So our main goal was also to measure their memory span. So we varied the difficulty of the sequence to be remembered based on each infant's performance. Each infant started from a level 3, so 3 syllables, and then they either moved to more difficult or easier sequences based on their accuracy. If the infant's memory capacity is greater than or equal to the size of the sequence to be remembered, they should correctly recognize the target sequence in the test and distinguish it from the distracting stimuli. Otherwise, they should perform at chance. Okay, so let's move on to the results. I want you to first take a look at the distribution of infants' working memory span in the verbal domain, which, to the best of our knowledge, has now been described in infants' literature. And in our sample, it varies from 1 to 4. Given the wide age range of our sample, I grouped the children in 4 groups to show you the distribution of the memory span on the y-axis, divided by age on the x-axis. As you can see from the graph, the groups show somehow similar patterns. In fact, the mean of each group is between 2 and 3 items independently from age, but there is a high variability overall in the sample and even within age ranges. So we have infants that perform above median and infants that perform below median. So the question arises spontaneously: what are the factors that might be implied in this variability? We have 2 hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that it could be linked to the acquisition of lexicon and vocabulary. And so the number of words they can produce, they can understand. And this hypothesis comes from studies on older children, which demonstrate that working memory is necessary to acquire lexicon and to broaden the vocabulary. And also that phonological working memory skills in preschool years provide predictive index of vocabulary growth and utterances complexity in the first school years. To investigate this hypothesis, we asked parents of the infants to complete the tiny short version of the MBCDI that, as many of you know, provides us a standardized measure of expressive and receptive communication skills. Okay, so to test our hypothesis, we ran correlational analysis between working memory performance and the MBCDI measures. And so namely the number of words produced, the number of words comprehended, and the number of gestures produced, and we did not find any significant correlation. So as an exploratory analysis, we decided to apply a median split approach to investigate whether there were significant differences between infants that perform really well at the working memory task and infants who perform worse. And as you can see from the first two graphs, we found significant differences in the expressive and receptive vocabulary, while we did not find any differences in the gestures. These results are very interesting, since while expressive and receptive vocabulary are related to the acquisition of a lexicon, gestures are related more to communication rather than lexicon acquisition. And this brings us to the second hypothesis that we have. That is that the variability might be linked to even more primitive skills, such as the amount of vocalization and articulatory practice that they have during the day. In fact, we know that, especially in the earlier steps of development, the vocabulary might not be fully developed nor rich. And this hypothesis comes from studies that I showed at the beginning, showing that infants have some primitive processes of articulatory rehearsal to maintain phonological information. So to measure the articulatory abilities of infants, we use the Language Environment Analysis System, LENA, which is a wearable recorder that we asked infants to wear for 12 continuous hours up to 16. And this technology is really nice because allows us to extract the child vocalization count, which is an estimate of how many vocalization they produce during the day in an ecological setting. And this is important, especially for those infants that do not have a vocabulary yet. And so this provides us a measure of primitive language skills. Okay. So to test this hypothesis, we still ran correlational analysis. As you can see, we found a correlation between working memory, phonological working memory abilities, and the child vocalization count per minute, even when controlling for age. Moreover, we applied a median split approach, as we did before, and we found a significant difference in number of vocalization produced between children that had a higher and a lower memory span. So to summarize our results, firstly, our results suggest that phonological working memory has a mean capacity of 2 in infancy with a high inter-individual variability. And the results also suggest that this variability might be linked to language acquisition, especially to those processes that are more primitive and linked to articulatory mechanisms. This supports the idea that articulatory mechanisms are crucial to hold verbal information online. Individual differences in phonological working memory are also related to vocabulary development, but to a lesser extent at this age. And that this might be linked to the fact that that there's a high variability at this age in the vocabulary of each child. Of note, no association was found with gestures, suggesting that the mechanisms of language development that are exclusively verbal are linked with phonological working memory, demonstrating the specificity of this process. So these are our first steps understanding these mechanisms, and more studies are needed to understand the direction of this relation and to better comprehend this how this mechanism functions. Our group is designing experimental manipulation to understand the causality, and we're also currently carrying on longitudinal data collection to understand more deeply if the hypotheses of articulatory processes and working memory are actually predictors of subsequent language acquisition. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to my amazing group led by Professor Benavides-Varela.
Thank you, Chiara. We have some time for a few questions. I don't see hands from young researchers. Can I have Luca? Young souls.
I'm sorry, you know, you have been left with me. It's just really a very sad story, but that's the way it is. Yeah. So that's very interesting research. But I am a bit puzzled. So I have a question and a suggestion. The puzzle is about the phonological working memory of 2. Let me tell you why. I cannot understand how this can be made compatible with the fact that a very whole lot of, for example, the statistical learning literature uses 3-syllabic structure. So to me, this suggests that the procedure that you're using, which is a clever procedure, might underestimate the phonological working memory. Also because, well, that is not an argument, but we know that, for example, in vision, kids have, at these ages that you tested, a span of 3, they can follow 3 objects separately. Now, this is not, I mean, it could be completely different, but yeah. Now, so, and this is the puzzle, and the suggestion would be, I wonder whether you have any other measure that could be a little more refined than simply 1, 2, 3, 4. For example, in adults, what we do when we try to do this kind of thing is, I don't know if it is possible in your paradigm, but for example, say, how do you decide that an adult has working memory span 7? Well, you do, you know, the experiment, and then when you get to 7, if you don't do, say, 5 times correct number 8, you say 7. But you can also say 7 plus 3 errors as opposed to 7 plus 2 errors. So you can just try to find differences which are between these. And maybe if you do that, you find, as it were, a distribution that may allow you to better run the correlation. I wonder if you have thought about this kind of issue.
No, we're actually trying to understand this. And what we're doing right now, so the sequence of syllables that we're using are really different between them. And we're actually trying to understand if maybe the sounds that they can already produce are somehow facilitating them, and the sounds that they do not produce are like making it more challenging for them. So currently I'm doing this kind of analysis. It's just we have to extract from the Lina device all the syllables that they can produce and compare this to which trials they perform better. But that's a good suggestion about the 7 plus the number of error. I will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I also have a very similar question, honestly, but it's a little tiny bit in a different direction. So just bear with me for a second. Given also, I'm assuming when you say items, you're speaking about syllables?
Syllables, yeah.
Yeah. So in a similar mind to statistical learning, we also have non-adjacent dependency pair learning. And this is, yes, it's rule-based learning. It's not specifically the exact same thing, but you have multiple types of rules presented at the exact same time to infants in a similar span, or age groupings, where they are not only capable of learning these rules, these non-adjacent rules, in their native languages, but also in non-native languages. So a lot of work from Jutta Müller, also from Claudia Mennel and Marielle Paul have shown this with German infants learning Italian structures in 1, 2, and 3-year-olds, if I remember correctly. So I was wondering, what does this mean if there's really only a capacity for 2 items? How then would you then argue that, how does it fit together with rule-based learning? I mean, if they're not able to carry over that information, then generally speaking, they shouldn't be able to learn the rules at all.
I mean, it might be that the task is really challenging for them because like they're exposed to a target stimuli and a lot of distracting stimuli intermixed. So I'm not familiar with the studies you're talking about, but that might also be a reason why they can't perform well with you know, higher and more difficult sequences.
Okay, we have time for one short question.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Very exciting. I have a quick question about the LINA results correlating with working memory. And so kind of along the lines of what you responded to Luca before. So essentially, I'm surprised that the quantity rather than the quality is what you're after. I would think the opposite, right? So a baby or an infant, I forgot what age they were, who goes on saying ba, 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 ba really many, many times, will score high with the LINA. But that's just a single syllable, right? As opposed to a baby maybe producing less, but variable syllables. So I would really like to see quality rather than, or variability rather than quantity.
We are doing this as just, of course, it requires transcription of the audio files, which, you know, it takes longer than, especially because we usually do it with 30 minutes of transcription. So it's a really, long process, but that's something that we are currently doing. We are having interns transcribing the whole segments, and we're gonna hopefully have more results about this.
Thank you so much, Chiara.